Rock Club Foundation is my pursuit of sustainable, affordable energy. I started building gasification that led me to go to all-purpose laboratories in California. The people are awesome gasification builders, and I did a really awesome interview with them a few years ago. I didn't film it really well, but I did my best because, but please like, subscribe, and share.
Or metal artisans for Burning Man.
Okay,
back in the day.
So this used to be a gathering spot for Burning Man. It used to be artist workshops, so different artists come together and work on different things. But now,
well, what happened was back in the day, the city of Berkeley didn't like the fact that there were artists living and welding in shipping containers, and so they played hardball and they basically shut down our electricity. And the artists here, the welders here, decided we'll generate our own damn electricity, and so they started welding together gasifiers.
And yeah, making electricity is very hard, especially for something as big as a welder.
Yeah, exactly.
And you need like an actual generator, not like, you know, wind power, solar panel. It doesn't really work that well for that type of
it'll work, but not for like things like welding and stuff.
Well, it was very hard to. And that gasifiers started, and so you guys, and now you guys are the biggest gasifier.
Well, I wouldn't say we're the biggest, but we're at the small scale, we're like one of the few which are still around.
Okay.
A lot of the small scale companies have gone out of business. Let me show you one of our machines.
Okay. This is a power. This is the latest version of the all-purpose laboratory. What do you call it? Gasifier? Or?
It's a biomass gasifier genset.
Okay, genset. Yeah.
It's a generator system, right? So what this is, the way to think about this machine is you have to see it as two halves. This half is a refinery, and this half is a generator. And the refinery takes crude biomass as its feedstock. Basically takes wood chips and nutshells.
So this is the hopper where it is filled up, and then go down here, and then the corkscrew in the bottom that heat it, and then go through all these different processes and things, and then
I can roughly describe what's going on here. Essentially, what's going on is the nutshells or wood chips that go into here get dried out, and the dried nutshells or wood chips end up sent into here, and this is a pyrolysis reactor. Yeah. The pyrolysis reactor turns that into charcoal.
Yeah,
right?
So
it turns it into charcoal. In the process of making charcoal, a lot of smoke is released, but the smoke can't be sent to the engine because it'll gum up the engine. Okay. Smoke will condense into tar, right? So the smoke material actually gets burnt, and that burnt smoke material produces a tremendous amount of heat, and the gases which are produced are water vapor and carbon dioxide. When you percolate that material through hot charcoal, there's a chemical reaction that goes on that produces hydrogen and carbon monoxide. Okay. And since hydrogen and carbon monoxide are both combustible, the engine burns that. And
so you did a process. So you use a carbon to separate the carbon from the smoke. That's awesome. Yeah.
We use the charcoal to carry out reduction reactions to produce a clean burning gas. This vessel here collects the charcoal ash material. Yeah. The material that comes out here is usable. Is usable as biochar. And biochar is a fantastic soil amendment. Well, anyways, what happens is that gas material then comes through here. A cyclone drops out all the dust. This charcoal is a dusty material, and the dust will ruin the engine, right? Okay. So that spins that material around, and all the charcoal dust falls out here. And that gas then goes to this heat exchanger, recovers heat. And this machine also produces hot water, by the way. Yeah. So and the heat recovered ends up producing hot water. So that gas then goes through here to a filtration system. And that filtration system catches all the remaining little bits that the cyclone missed.
So this is also double as a boiler?
No, this is not. The boiler is this vessel here, this little guy. Okay. And there's also another vessel inside. Okay. And that gas then comes into this engine here.
And this is a pretty large...
Yeah, it is a pretty large engine. However, the power output from the gasifier is generally significantly lower than the rated power of the engine for one particular reason. It's because the gasifier is aspirated with atmospheric air, and atmospheric air is like 79% nitrogen, right? Okay. So the gas is a little bit diluted, and because it's diluted, the power output of the engine is not as high as the engine's rated power, but it's still pretty powerful. This machine puts out 25 kilowatts. If you want 25 kilowatts from a solar array, you'd have to fill the top of like this entire barn on the side here. This fireman's storage shack. 25 kilowatts is in solar panels is a lot, right?
Yeah, 25 kilowatts.
Yeah. So I mean that's 25,000 watts. So anyways, this this engine cranks that generator, and this generator is what puts the electricity out. Now over here you'll see this black cube, or that little rectangular looking thing.
Yeah.
Right? That is a heat exchanger. Normally, the engine produces waste heat that you need to radiate away to keep the engine cool, right?
Yeah.
But in our machine, we also have another source of waste heat, which is the hot gases from the reactor, which are initially too hot to go into the engine, right?
Yeah.
We cool down those gases to heat up coolant, and then that coolant heats up. You can probably look down here, you'll see it from this angle, this box. This is the heat exchanger, and that heat exchanger produces hot water. So this machine can generate...
So that's another boil.
Another what?
Boil?
It doesn't boil. It doesn't actually get the water.
But
hot,
another
but
water
heat
heater.
exchanger.
Yeah.
And so, by that means, this machine recovers waste heat in multiple stages. It recovers waste heat from the engine coolant, and it recovers waste heat from the reactor. Now, in the case where you're not using the hot water, if the temperature gets too high, then it actually turns on the radiator to cool down the engine. But when you're actually using the energy, why waste it, right? Why dissipate it out the radiator? So yeah, that's what our machine's like. Let me show you the big one. It's actually taken out of the carbon cycle because charcoal doesn't really revert back to carbon dioxide without combustion. So if you bury charcoal in the soil in the form of biochar, to be sure you actually have to send it through the composting process because mixing it straight in the soil is not so good for the soil. But if you properly prepare biochar and you put it in the soil, you're essentially doing reverse coal mining.
So
because you're making solid black carbon and
people don't realize it's like so burning stuff is actually really good. Is actually just as good for the environment because plants are like a natural solar panel. And it's we turn into a carbon cycle. Well, if you're burning fossil fuel, that fossil fuel is mined, and you got the
you're taking carbon that has been in the ground for a long time that hasn't been in the carbon cycle, and you're putting it into the atmosphere, right?
And mining is really bad for the environment.
Certainly.
All the fracking and everything else that have this problem.
Now, I do want to point out one thing. If you have a gasifier, if you're chopping down a fresh tree to like power your thing, you're doing it wrong. Right? Like, no one's advocating going out cutting down a fresh tree, but the lumber industry, they make rectangular boards out of round logs, right? And you have all these offcuts and all these scraps, and what do? They chip them up. And normally they toss them away or use it as just like mulch, playground mulch, right? A lot of this material, you could recover the energy from this and make a fantastic soil amendment at the same time, right? So yeah. Do you guys this thing with we can?
So if you contact All Purpose Labs, they might contact you with somebody that make charcoal and get you charcoal for.
Well, let me show you the web.
Carbon.net.
Yeah, it's Local Carbon Network. And this is our effort to do community-based carbon sequestration. And if you have a community farm, we would find some sponsor to help cover the cost of the char, but then we would supply you with char on a regular basis, and that would increase the carbon levels of your soil and increase your yields. If you are just an individual consumer and you want to do home composting, under the climate products thing, we actually sell char subscriptions. So you get char deliveries every 3 months for a period of 12 months of 1 year. And that costs basically $75.
And then this is a whole kit for $150.
The whole kit includes a heavily insulated compost tumbler that produces really high quality compost.
And then 3 every 12 months.
Yeah, one delivery every 3 months for a year, right?
Okay.
Delivery of these packages?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the individual subscription thing. But let me show you what we did with Giltrack Farm. And our biochar is also not quite the same as other biochar that you could find. Like if you go on Amazon, you can find other biochar, but our char is exposed to a particularly high temperature process that results in some interesting properties.
Okay.
When you expose charcoal to high enough temperatures, it starts converting into a structure that's similar to graphite and becomes electrically conductive. And the electrical conductivity is remarkably beneficial to microbes. That was actually fairly recently discovered.
Okay.
But anyways, let me show you the results real quick, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So here are a pair of collard greens, and these collard greens got the biochar compost. Let me show you another example. You see this broccoli plant? This is also at Giltrack Farm. This broccoli plant is not growing in bad soil by any measure. Look at that soil. It's basically like potting mix, right? But the one that got the co-composted biochar is just busting out. It's just growing radically faster. And this is a particularly stunning example. This is a pumpkin plant at Giltrap Farm, right? The one that received the conventional compost versus the one that received the co-composted biochar, right? It's like a night and day difference. Over and over, we see examples like this. Plain compost for artichoke, this got stricken by some sort of fungal pathogen. The very next row over, same pathogens are blowing in the wind, but this one didn't get infected, right? And also it was growing rather vigorously. Some examples of the raised beds. When you add the biochar to the compost, the thing that you will notice, first thing you'll notice is that it reduces the odor. When you mix the charcoal into the compost, the odor problem largely goes away. You want to mix in about roughly 10% by bulk volume. So about roughly 10% of that, the volume of that was biochar. You mix that in there. It reduced the odor, but the other crazy thing that happens when you mix biochar into compost is the compost starts composting really hot. Prior to adding biochar to these piles at Giltrap Farm, they were getting temperatures of about 130 degrees, right? And when they would turn the piles would cool down and wouldn't quite recover. When they started adding biochar to the piles, they got temperatures as hot as like 155, 160, sometimes higher.
So it got to get hot a bit, the compost.
It got really hot, right? Now, as a point of reference, keep in mind, like medium rare steak is like 135, right? This thing is heating up to like 155 degrees. If your arm were in there, it'd cook your arm, right? This is really hot. Now, why is hot compost good? When the temperature is really high, all of the weed seeds get killed and all the pathogens get cooked to death, right? And it breaks down the compost really, really thoroughly. So you end up with a very, very thoroughly decomposed material. And when it's thoroughly decomposed, then the nutrients are able to be given back up. Whereas if it's still decomposing, it can lock up nitrogen and cause a lot of other problems like that. And they're not even the only one. This photo is a little bit lower resolution. Let me see if I can enlarge this. This in Oakland. It's a garden serving the community where I think they, if I remember correctly, I think 5 feet tall.
Wait, can you go back to the original picture of it?
In a month and a half, it went from this to this.
Wow.
How fast
And look, it's the
did
biggest thing in the whole garden.
I don't know. I don't have experience growing artichoke. This was reported to us by the farm guys at Giltrap Farm. 8 times as many artichokes.
Wow.
It was an absolute game changer for the farm. Everything that they
just sunflower that you ever seen.
Yeah, this I think it grew up to like 9 feet tall.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, like look at this. This is Linda here. 9 or 10 feet. I'm estimating from this looks more like 10 feet to me. But anyways, here's Linda. Look at how broad those leaves are. The leaves are almost as broad as her shoulders. It's on the other side. You can see they're drooping a little bit. Probably needs a little bit of water. But the leaves are almost as broad as her shoulders here. The sunflower.
And see, and it's twice as tall as her.
Yeah, and now the thing is the biochar causes everything in the compost pile to just decompose faster. So this is an experiment that was done at a school garden in San Francisco at a place called A Living Library. And they got one of our compost tumblers, which has 2 chambers. And you know, when you're doing composting, you need to balance the so-called the greens and the browns. Yeah. Right. The brown material is stuff that's carbon rich, and the green material is stuff that's nitrogenous. Right. So manure, even though it's technically it's brown colored, but it's considered a green material
because it's more wet.
Nitrogen. And at the farm, or not the farm, at this school, they were using basically the kids' school lunch waste as the greens. And they were using cardboard, shredded cardboard, and leaves and twigs that they'd raked up as the browns. And they filled both chambers, but one of the chambers got biochar. And the chamber that got the biochar in the same amount of time, I think this was about 2 months, broke that material down, whereas the material, the one that didn't get the biochar is still largely intact. Mm-hmm. Right? The biochar dramatically speeds up the decomposition process and all the microbial activity. So here's a close-up of the compost that received the biochar. Okay. Right? And the one close-up of the one that didn't get the biochar.
Composting process.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let me explain this. So this is a map of roughly what our scheme is with the local carbon network. Biomass waste goes through our genset. The genset generates electricity, and it produces this charcoal material, which is usable as biochar. That material gets mixed with food waste to get composted, and that compost then goes to local gardens and increases their yields, and also sequesters the carbon content of this. Because when you bury charcoal, again, I mentioned charcoal doesn't really decompose. It doesn't break down, right? It behaves like a mineral in the soil, right? And like rocks in the soil. Essentially, what happens is the charcoal is going in the soil, remaining there, and it's improving the fertility of the soil. You're putting the carbon away for a long period of time, right? So charcoal that gets sent into the soil